Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if speaking more than one language can actually change how your brain ages? This new study dives deep into that question, and the results are pretty interesting, especially when we look at different groups of people. So, we all know that as we get older, our brains can start to slow down a bit. And sadly, some people are at higher risk for serious issues like dementia. Scientists are always looking for things we can do to keep our brains healthy as we age. And one idea that has been around for a while is that being bilingual might actually give your brain a boost. It's thought that constantly switching between languages builds up something called cognitive reserve, kind of like mental muscle that helps protect your brain. But the research on this has been a bit mixed, and a lot of it has been done on smaller groups, or without looking closely at how different backgrounds might matter. That is where this study comes in, using a really cool dataset called the Health and Aging Brain Study Health Disparities, or HABS-HD. The main question here was pretty straightforward. Does being bilingual help protect against dementia and slow down age-related memory loss? And importantly, does this protection look different for people of different ethnicities or genders? They wanted to see if bilingualism was like a shield for the brain, and if that shield worked the same for everyone. So how did they tackle this? They used data from over 4,000 older adults, aged 50 and up, who were part of the HABS-HD study. They looked at two main things. First, whether someone was diagnosed with dementia at the start of the study. And second, how their cognitive skills, like memory and problem solving, changed over time. They asked people if they used a second language, and based on that, sorted them into either bilingual or monolingual groups. Then, they gave everyone a bunch of different thinking tests. They even followed many of these participants for up to 4 visits over several years, which is super important for understanding how things change. Think of it like taking snapshots of people's brains over time. They also made sure to account for other things that can affect cognition, like how old people were, how much schooling they had, their gender, and their ethnicity. Now for the findings. First off, when they looked at whether people had dementia right at the start of the study or if they developed it over the years, being bilingual didn't seem to make a difference. So it didn't directly prevent dementia diagnosis in this group. But when they looked at cognitive abilities, things got more interesting across the whole group. There wasn't a clear bilingual advantage. However, when they broke it down by ethnicity, they saw some surprising differences. Hispanic people who were bilingual tended to have better scores on tests of executive function, which is like your brain's control center for planning and focus, and also on tests of episodic memory, which is your ability to recall personal experiences. But this advantage wasn't seen in white participants. And in black participants, bilingualism was actually linked to lower episodic memory scores, which is a really unexpected finding. This is where the longitudinal data really shines. Even though bilingualism didn't seem to affect whether someone got dementia, it did seem to affect how their memory changed over time. The researchers found that bilingualism was linked to a slower decline in episodic memory. This was true even after they accounted for things like age, education, gender, and ethnicity. This finding held up even when looking at people over several years. However, they didn't see the same effect for executive function in the long run. So, the benefit of bilingualism appeared to be specifically for memory, and it seemed to slow down the natural fading of that memory over time. So, what does all this mean? The study suggests that bilingualism might not be a magic bullet to prevent dementia altogether, but it could indeed be a form of cognitive reserve, specifically helping to preserve memory as we get older. This is the active reserve idea, where an experience like managing multiple languages actively helps your brain function better over time. The researchers think that the differences they saw between ethnic groups at the start of the study, especially the advantage for Hispanic bilinguals and the unexpected disadvantage for Black bilinguals, might be more about sociocultural factors rather than just the act of being bilingual itself. Things like how often people switch between languages in daily life, or other life experiences tied to their ethnic background could be playing a big role. This highlights how crucial it is to look at the whole picture, including someone's background and life experiences, when we study how brains age and how language might play a part. Here is a really interesting contrast the researchers drew. They compared the effect of bilingualism to the effect of education. They noted that while lots of studies show that higher education is linked to better memory at one point in time, longitudinal studies suggest education doesn't actually slow down memory decline over the years. It might just mean people with higher education started out with better memories. But With bilingualism, they did see a slower rate of decline in memory. This suggests that bilingualism, unlike education, might be offering a more direct, ongoing protective effect for memory. Going back to those cross-sectional findings, the story is complex. The advantage for Hispanic bilinguals was clear in both memory and executive function at the start of the study. But the lack of benefit and even potential harm for Black bilinguals in memory is something that needs a lot more exploration. The researchers suspect this might be tied to how people actually use their languages day to day or other life experiences that are tied to their ethnicity. For instance, if Hispanic bilinguals are constantly switching between Spanish and English in their daily lives, that constant mental juggling could be the key. In contrast, some white bilinguals might be people who learn the language later in life for enjoyment and don't use it actively enough to get that cognitive workout. This idea of differential language experience is really central. It's not just about knowing two languages, but how you use them. If you are constantly needing to switch, to translate, to choose the right word in a conversation, that is a very different experience than someone who learned a second language in school and rarely uses it. The study points out that Hispanic participants in their study reported more balanced use of Spanish and English, suggesting more frequent language switching. This kind of active engagement could be the real driver of cognitive benefits. Now, no study is perfect, and it is important to